So, we often hear it's not what you said, it's how you said it. Well, in sales, it's actually both. It's also what you said. Hi, I'm Anne Jean Pierre, and welcome to another episode of the Godly Business Podcast, where we discuss sales fundamentals with biblical principles. So, today we're going to continue our conversation around sales fundamentals, and I wanted to talk about three things that I believe will make a huge difference in you closing more sales for the better or for worse, however you approach it. So, we're going to dig right into it. But before I start, I want to tell you a little story. So, one of my first car that I wanted to buy by myself, my big girl car, after college was a Hyundai. Yes, I know. By the time that was the car that I wanted. So I went to a Hyundai dealership with my brother. We looked at the cars, and we started the negotiation and things like that. So keep in mind, I was already pre approved for about $20,000, but I wanted to stay way under that. So I was looking at cars that were max 15. So after doing some test driving, found a car that I wasn't too excited about, but you know what? It fit the bill. It ticked all the boxes. I just needed a car. I'm not a big car person. So long story short, having a conversation with the guy, he's trying to build rapport the best way he can, not doing such a great job, but A for effort, right? So we're getting into the conversation, doing the whole negotiation. He goes get the manager or whatever to try to break the deal, right? So the manager comes in, and this is where everything goes downhill from there. You would think that the manager would know better, right? But no. So this is where everything goes downhill fast. So long story short, this is what the manager had to say. He was like, well, you know what? We got a Chevy Cruze that you can get. And I was like, okay, but I wanted to get a Hyundai. He was like, well, you can't afford it, so you can get the Cruze. Pretty much. Just like that, with that attitude and everything. So needless to say, I was like, okay, well, I'm done. I'm ready to go. I told my brother I'm done. He was like, relax, like whatever. I'm like, no, I'm not buying. There was another gentleman who kind of like saw what happened and tried to smooth things over. And I was like, I'm not interested. I'm not buying anything here ever. You will never see me here. I'm not stepping foot in here. So honestly, after that and how he handled the situation, I had no interest in making any purchases. Like, they could have told me the car is they're gonna give me for $3,000. Okay, I lied. I lied. If they told me they were gonna give me for $3,000, I would have taken it. Okay, but long story short, I was not that far apart, right? So I was willing to pay a little bit more, but everybody knows the game. When you're at a dealership, you don't pay the price that's on the tag, right? So you do the back and forth. So for me, while I was willing to go up in price to close the deal, the way he handled the situation, I was not willing to pay a penny and was out of there. So the thing is, a lot of times it is how you say things, but it also is on what you say. So the first thing I want to talk about is wording. Wording is huge when it comes to sales. This is something in sales, you talk about word poetry, and how you present something and how you phrase it can make a huge difference between closing the sale, having objections because of what you said, not even how you say it. That's important as well. But just based on what you said, you can create a lot of confusion and getting the person to have objections. Now, what's an example of that? Let's say you're having the conversation with someone and you can kind of see that they're like hesitant. They're like, I'm not too sure. And then you say, do you want to think about it? Why would you say that? You just pretty much gave the person an objection to give back to you. I've seen this happen where people say things like that, not thinking there's anything wrong with it, but it is. You just shot yourself in the foot. Instead of saying that, you could have said, hey, it seems like you may have some question that you need to clarify. What kind of question, what kind of thing, or what is it that's bothering you? What is it that's making you question it? It seems like you want to, you're thinking about it. So how can I answer the question? Right? So all of those ways are ways you can ask to clarify and clear out whatever the person is thinking about. Because remember, once the person leaves, the likelihood of you closing that sale is slim to none, especially in like certain markets like dealerships and things like that, right? So the point is you want to try to close the sale today. So therefore, the questions that you ask have to be very, very strategic, and what you say is also very important as how you say it. So that's the first thing, is getting your wording right. Also, one of the things I always advertise and advise and advocate for is to make sure you have certain questions that's always on the back of your mind to ask. I always suggest you have 5 minimum questions to ask if it's a walk in the door type of situation, like where you had no pre-consultation or anything like that. When it comes to pre-consultation, like the person is coming to have like scheduling a time to talk to you, I definitely suggest having 10 to 15 questions ready to ask. So it's very, very important that you have very specific questions. The what are you looking for? The why now is a huge thing, right? Why now? Why are you on the market for a car right now? That will get you a better idea of what it is that the person is looking for. If you're in car dealership, for example, right? Or even if you are looking to get a new coach or consultant, same thing. Your prospect, ask them if they are looking, right, I should say, right? So ask them, like, why are you looking now? Why is now very important? And the type of questions that you ask are going to make a huge difference in you being able to, one, avoid certain objections, because those questions will give you the answer on how to phrase your presentation. So that will, a lot of them will help you to reduce the likelihood of you getting objections. But also, if you do get objections, those questions, having the right questions, will also help you to overcome those objections. So wording is very, very important. And of course, how you ask the question is also important. Now, the how, I want to look at it from a different perspective than the example I gave you earlier, right? But the how is important in, for example, building rapport. Remember how I said how the conversation, he was trying to build rapport the best way he could? I could tell it was not genuine. He was not trying to build rapport to like get to know me or whatever. It was so boring and so generic and like, yeah, you pulled this right out of training, right? You're not trying at all. So this is why I say the how of how you ask is very important. Yes, they tell you you have to be empathetic when you're having conversation. Just remember, it's a human being that you're talking to. Just have a regular conversation. You don't have to make it so complicated or so strategic and so like ninja and all that. Like, you talking to a person, just have a regular conversation. And when they say to have empathy, like, I'm not saying that you have to, oh man, really, that's really sucks. That's not genuine, right? Like, if I'm having a conversation, I'm like, yeah, I totaled my car, so therefore that's why I'm looking for a new car, right? There's a way to connect with the person. So how you do that is very important, because any other human being can tell when you are not being genuine. So that's also a fast way to totally lose the person and trying to connect with them on that level. All right, so now that we have our wording, we know what to say and how to say it. The next thing is your timing. So going back to the conversation of building rapport again, if you have listened to any of my previous podcasts, you know that me, when I advise people to build rapport, is to ask questions. That's how I suggest you build rapport, not around the sunshine, the moon, and traffic and all that stuff. Like, I don't think that is relevant to building rapport the right way in order for you to find the information that you need to close. Timing is important. Asking certain questions at the right time can help you to uncover certain things that maybe you would have never thought about or, you know, discovered without having those questions answered. So, asking the questions at the right time will help you to move along in yourself and overcome those objections even before they come. So, example, keeping with the car dealership, right? Asking someone what it is that you're looking in a car. Do you have families? Things like that. What it is that you, how do you use the car? All of those things is a great way to build rapport, because that will let you know, okay, the things that you need to give, get them the best car possible that they're looking for, right? Not only that, it also gets you to have a better understanding of what the person, what matters to the person. For example, let's say I'm like, oh, hey, I'm looking for an SUV. It needs to have 3 rows because I have 5 kids. I'm shuttling them here and there and things like that. So that kind of helps you to understand what that person needs, what that person needs are, right? So now the timing comes in, because now you understand these things, you can start making presentation and kind of answer to some of the questions or concern that they had, or that you uncovered that they will have or may have before you even close make your presentation for them to have an objection, if that makes sense. So what's an example I could think of? Let's say you're doing the car sales, right? And then the person is like, well, I'm not sure if this is the best car because, like, this might be a gas guzzler. I need something, whatever, right? So, and you asking and getting to know those things when you are doing your presentation, you don't want to wait until the end and for the person to bring that up again as a concern when you already know that was a concern, right? So what does that mean? So when you are presenting your, I don't know, Hyundai or a Honda Pilot, right? That has 3 rows. That's a bigger size car versus the other car that she wanted. And you're like, hey, you know what? I know one of your concern was that gas is going to be an issue. This car is electronic. I don't know. Keep up with me here. Or, has a smaller cylinder, so that means less gas for you. Right? So now, because you've already know what her concerns are, his or her concerns are, you already able to answer that question ahead of time so that later on they don't bring that up as a possible objection to yourselves. Does that make sense? So timing is important, and when you're answering those questions. Also, kind of like what we talked about last week, if someone brings up a question, like you're doing your presentation, like, hey, based on everything you told me, I think, oh, my camera just went blurry. I don't know how long has it been blurry. Sorry. But we're just going to continue. But let's say, like, hey, based on the conversation we had, you said, hey, this is what you said was going to be blah, blah. And then you're doing your presentation and the person stop you and say, well, what about this? What I would suggest is you answer that question right then and there. Stop, say, oh, you know what? That's a great point to your question, blah, blah, blah. But I will go more in details on that. But this is the answer to the question. This is and that, right? The reason being is, as I stated last week, you do not want to ignore the question, because when you move on and say, hey, I'm going to answer this question later, well, the person now is barely listening to what you're saying because they're waiting for the answer to their question. So you definitely want to make sure that you take the time to answer that question, and also take the time to ask, does that make sense? Right? Why? Because it may not make sense. In your head, it may be like, yeah, this clicks. You using, of course, we talked about how some, depend on your audience, you don't use, technical languages, but you still want to take the time to be like, hey, does that make sense? Okay. Do you have any other questions about that? Great. Now we're going to move on to the next thing. All right. So you want to definitely make sure that your timing is on point with certain things, that you also make sure you ask for the close when the time comes. That's a whole different subject, but that is something that I often see where people give information, answer question, and never actually ask to close the sale and move forward with the sale. So you definitely want to make sure that at the end of this whole conversation shebang, you ask for the sale. All right. Are you ready to sign? Here are the paperwork. Let's go. Close. All right. So the last part is your tone of voice. So I've talked about this, and I don't even know how many podcasts, but of course, if this is the first time you're listening to it, I'm going to reiterate and talk about it again. Your tone of voice is super, super important, because that can relay whether or not you're confident, whether or not you are anxious, and most importantly, your tone of voice, to me, can also be one of the reasons why, if you are a sales coach or sell product, if you get a lot of people to keep asking or negotiating your prices when your prices are not negotiable, it might be because of how you're saying what you're saying. So what do I mean by that? Your tone of voice, one of the things I've noticed is for newer salespeople or people who are not confident with their pricing, when it comes to having the sales conversation around money or closing or asking for the sales and the price point, for some reason, their voice changes. So their voice shake, or they become hesitant, or they lower their voice, or something happens to where your confidence went from all the way up to just crashing and burning. For example, if let's say you want to tell your coach and you're like, yeah, so my prices are like $1,500. If that's how you present your offer to the person, now because of how you say it, it makes me feel like, okay, this price is not settled, so it is negotiable. And therefore now, especially for my personality type, I enter with, oh, okay, well, can you do $1,300? Right? Or you're selling the product and you use that same tone of voice and you're like, yeah, well, it's like $15. It's like $15, or is it $15? So which one is it? Because I'm going to give you an offer. Oh, well, can you do it for $10? Right? So you have to make sure you look into whether or not your tone of voice is the reason why people are constantly asking you to either reduce your price or negotiate, because you are giving them room based on how you're saying things that it's okay for them to negotiate with you. Okay, so those are the three main things that I want you to think about in your sales conversation, and how you might need to reconsider what you say, not just how you say it, the timing of what you say, and also your tone of voice, because those three things will make a huge difference on whether or not you're crushing it or barely making it. So I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have questions, concern, something you'd like for me to expand more on. And actually, today's verse was from Colossians. Let me find my way. It was on Colossians 6, verse, where is it? Colossians 4, Colossians 4, verse 6, which says, let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person. So keep that verse in mind, pray about it, think about it, mull it over. I think this verse is timing for what the conversation we just had, but Focus on that part, right? You will know how you should respond to each person. Remember, again, sales the conversation. This prospect is different than the next prospect, which is why you always asking all of those questions. You're not making assumptions, right? That this person, because they fit this demographic, therefore they fit the mold of everyone else. You want to make sure that you are speaking to the individual and not just your group or avatar that you created. Okay. So again, let me know if you have questions, concern, want me to expand on things. Definitely keep following for more information regarding sales. Any sales questions that you have regarding sales conversation, I am your girl. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. God bless, and I hope He keeps you, instructs you, and teach you in the way that you should go. And I will see you guys next week.